Saying how successful the last Helldivers entry was, seriously, thank you all for that, because that is just insane. The level of reception surprised the hell out of me. Yes, even the criticisms. Today, however, we're going to be looking more precisely into why Super Earth seems to be so focused on weakening its own shock troopers, the Helldivers. And once again, this is not meant to bash Arrowhead. Plenty of people already do that. This is simply an attempt to look deeper into the situation and figure out what the hell is actually going on here. So, without further ado, let's begin. In order to understand the present, one must first understand the past, and that begins with the First Galactic War. Much like the conflict Super Earth faces today, a similar three-way war took place 100 years ago. The Federation stood against the Bugs, the Cyborg, and the Illuminate, with the usual propaganda machine claiming that they are evil, socialist, communist, anything that is not considered democratic. Despite that war, the first Helldivers were deployed. Citizen soldiers, much like those of today, who roamed directly into the fire. Shock troop equipped with some of the best technology the Federation had to offer in order to combat these horrors threatening their way of life. Though admittedly, one could argue Super Earth brought much of this upon itself, but I digress. What matters is the outcome. During the First Galactic War, Super Earth actually had a contingency plan in place should the original homeworld fall. If conquered or destroyed, the Federation would simply relocate to a pre-designated colony world and establish a new Super Earth. The government fully understood the possibility of defeat, and yet, despite being horribly outnumbered, that contingency was never needed. The Helldivers and Super Earth won. For the next 100 years, peace mostly reigned throughout the Federation. Helldivers were reduced to policing actions, propaganda pieces, and exploratory forces tasked with identifying worlds that could be eventually annexed and stripped of resources and folded into the machine of Super Earth. But why go over all this? Because while we know the official history, we really only know part of it. What was happening behind the scenes was merely hinted at the opening stages of the Second Galactic War. There is something that repeats throughout nearly every civilization humanity has ever created: discontentment. Every government eventually faces it. 3-4 generations pass, roughly 80 to 100 years, and the generations born in stability begin reacting against the world built by their parents. Even without economic collapse or societal instability, most political systems begin to fracture after enough time has passed. Managed democracy would be no exception. In fact, systems like managed democracy are arguably even more fragile than standard democracies because they rely entirely on perception. As society changes, even if later generations maintain the same quality of life or even better one than that of their parents and their ancestors, the human mind begins to grow dissatisfied and questions begin to emerge. Are the voices of the citizens actually being heard? Or is democracy merely a performance meant to preserve the power of a select few? And what happens when citizens begin questioning whether their vote truly matters or not? Because systems of power, whether democracies, monarchies, autocracies, dictatorships, only exist through belief, much like currency itself, they possess no inherent value outside the faith the people put into them. The moment belief begins to collapse, the system follows shortly thereafter. But one could only imagine the situation Super Earth found itself in after the First Galactic War. We already saw hints of it. Colonists and dissidents sent to frontier worlds with little more than scrap, forced to survive without meaningful protection from the Federation. Some died to the environment, others barely managed to create miserable little settlements at the edge of civilized space. At the same time, stricter enforcement of Super Earth's universalized truth began to emerge through organizations like the Truth Enforcers. Citizens disappeared into re-education centers, never to be seen again. This is because Super Earth was facing a crisis. But political instability was likely not the only threat looming over the Federation. If the political situation wasn't bad enough, there was also the very real possibility that the foundation of the interstellar civilization itself was beginning to fail. You see, over a century, the Bugs had effectively been farmed by Super Earth, captured, experimented on, mutilated, harvested for E710. The substance extracted from their bodies and utilized to fuel warships, and likely much of Super Earth's military infrastructure. It was cheap, efficient, nearly endless, the kind of resource that modern corporations would kill to possess. But biology rarely remained static under abuse. And when a species is subjected to constant experimentation, pain, captivity, and selective pressure, it changes. We've already seen that in the real world. After decades of extensive poaching for ivory, elephant populations began developing tusklessness at unprecedented rates. Originally a rare genetic trait affecting perhaps 2 to 4% of the population, but it has rapidly spread because elephants without tusks were no longer targets for poachers, allowing them to reproduce. Within only a handful of generations, entire populations began shifting shifting biology in response to human behavior. Now apply that principle to an insectoid species capable of reproducing exponentially faster than elephants ever could. How long would it take for a mutation to emerge that would render E710's effectiveness moot, or alter the biological composition necessary for extraction entirely? Not long, I'd say. Or still, Super Earth's constant tampering in an attempt to maximize decomposition rates and increase E710 yields likely created something far more dangerous than the original bugs ever were. The Terminids. More aggressive strains, more resilient strains, creatures biologically shaped by a century of industrialized torment, which makes the official narrative surrounding the Terminid outbreaks rather questionable. According to Super Earth, dissonance caused the containment breaches, yet the locations where the breaches occurred and the strategic value of the chaos that followed suggest something else entirely. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Super Earth itself planted Terminid eggs on board Helldiver ships in order to solve multiple problems at once. But what does any of this have to do with the enforced truth of Super Earth? Quite simply, the Helldivers did too well during the First Galactic War. They held back and defeated 3 enemy factions simultaneously. Super Earth capitalized on Illuminate technology. Federation built itself upon E710 harvesting of the bugs, and the cyborgs were enslaved and forced into industrial labor on Cyberstan. Victory transformed Super Earth into an interstellar superpower. And now, well, now Super Earth doesn't want the war to end. Ever. Every major catastrophe in the Second Galactic War only escalates the conflict further. The Termicide did not protect planets, it accelerated Terminid mutations and created horrors like the Spore variants and the Gloom, which I will say I do believe the Termicide not working is accidental. I'm not accusing Super Earth of actually doing that on purpose. The Cyborg legacy evolved into the automatons and returned stronger than ever before with the horrid Vox engines. The Illuminates once more re-emerged within the galaxy, taking over citizens of the Federation and making them into an army of mindless fodder to throw around, with only now their true power starting to emerge from their long-lost plans now reclaimed. And all throughout this escalation, Super Earth continually weakens Helldiver equipment, even as the enemy adapts and grows deadlier with every engagement. But why? Because if Helldivers were allowed to fight at full strength again, history would repeat itself, mostly. But now, despite being hamstrung, the Helldivers are still horrifyingly efficient. For every 1 diver killed, dozens of enemies die alongside them. Major orders succeed at absurd rates, reaching up to 90%, mind you. Entire enemy supply lines, fortifications, infrastructure networks vanish beneath orbital fire, and that is with weakened equipment. Tanks and mechs, once durable centerpieces of the original Helldiver arsenal, are now reduced to little more than medium armor paper mache. Priority targeting systems making them walking coffins. Nonsensical weak points are introduced into the armored vehicles, making them increasingly vulnerable and thus preventing the Helldivers from being overpowered. But from the perspective of Super Earth, this is all par for the course. This is what they want, and they would want to ensure that nothing can keep the Helldivers alive for too long to start questioning. Things such as long-term combat effectiveness, increased durability, more operational firepower. It's a problem. Because while victory is sweet, the spoils of war are far sweeter. E710, dark fluid technologies, singularity-based jump packs, once thought impossible, technical data extracted from the automaton infrastructure, now integrated into super destroyers and military hardware. All of these spoils from the continued war. And in only 2 years, Super Earth has achieved more technological advancement than it did during the previous century of peace, all at the cost of 7 billion Helldivers killed. War is often called the mother of invention for a reason, and the only true trade-off is the continued sacrifice of the force they convince millions to join. A force constantly called elite while simultaneously being treated as expendable rubes, the Helldivers. Whether Super Earth directly started the Second Galactic War is almost irrelevant at this point, to be entirely honest. What matters are the benefits the conflict provides to the Federation. A once discontent population is now unified under patriotic fury. The Helldiver Corps no longer sits idle long enough to question the system that uses them. Revolutionary thoughts disappear beneath endless deployment cycles and constant warfare. New fuel sources emerge from upgraded Terminids. New technologies harvested from every enemy Super Earth fights. The war itself has become the solution. That means it cannot be allowed to end. Because as long as the enemies of freedom continue to exist, humanity will continue sacrificing itself in the name of managed democracy. Even if Super Earth itself were to fall, the old contingency still remains. The Federation would simply relocate and establish a new homeworld and continue the cycle again somewhere else. The war is no longer about survival, or is the system itself. And that is the truth of the Galactic War. And that is why Super Earth keeps keeps the Helldivers weak. But that begs the question, what about the Sea Troopers? Are they not also subject to the same cycle? Well, if this video gets 1,000 views and 50 likes, we will explore the Sea in depth to understand the backbone of the Federation's military. Have a good day, and watch out, Helldiver, on your left.